Hello and welcome everyone to this week's episode of the Framework Podcast. I'm one of your two co-hosts, JB, and I'm going to be joined by my co-host Anna here today with one of our really first return guests to the show, Sonya Dreizler. And this time we get to talk about really some interesting happenings and bringing in your other co-founder of Choir here, Liv. And Liv, really excited to have you on the show. So as I told you before, we're probably going to pick on you a little bit more since I've gotten to ask Sonya some of these questions. I actually just, it reminded me, Sonya, when we shot your episode, it was like right before the world shut down because I was actually in Florida.
I remember that. You were at a vacation house or something, right?
I was at a vacation house, and it's the last time I've seen my grandparents, right, since kind of the world shut down. And then Judd didn't show up for it, and we were kind of wondering if he was going to show or not. That's my strongest memory, and I kind of like plugged in by this like TV in the weird corner of a rental house where I could get closer to the Wi-Fi. So that's our background on that one.
I remember that.
Yeah. Well, Liv, Sonya, thanks for being here today. I guess, Liv, maybe you kick off. Can you give us a 30 seconds of kind of who you are, what you do, and what you and Sonya have launched here recently? And we'll dive into it more as we go, but at least the 30-second view.
Sure. So my background is in PR, media relations, and branding within the financial services space. Spent about 10 years now working with anyone from large RIAs, broker-dealers, fintech companies, service providers, helping companies really get into the public eye. And a few years ago, I launched my own company focused mainly on social impact focused companies. And through that work in PR and media, I've really seen the behind the scenes of what goes into choosing different voices to feature on stage and in the media. And I met Sonya during that time, I think 2019. We met doing some media relations work and got to know each other. And about a year ago, I thought, wouldn't it be cool if we could find a way to bring more voices, more representative voices to the media and on stage? And Sonya and I came together and we're like, let's do this thing. So Choir is the industry's first conference diversity certification for financial conferences. And we're a diversity tech platform. We're helping lift the voices of more women, non-binary people, and people of color all across financial services.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to hear more about it, even though I knew some about it before it was announced, but I still haven't even done my full debrief call with the two of you. So we'll do half of that here today too. Yeah. Anna and I both love food, and so one of the questions we love to ask is about food here and just kind of what it means to you or your favorite type of food. So we can definitely hear from both of you, but Liv, if you want to kick us off there.
Yeah, also a fan of food. To me, I think we're talking about the pandemic, and that I think to me was the thing I missed the most, having a meal with friends around a table, just like family style, sharing plates. I love any sort of Asian cuisine, so I think to me when I think of a good food memory, it's sitting at a big table with like 18 different plates of food, sharing with friends.
And for me, I think very similarly to Liv, food for me is very connected to community. It's very much a social thing. Of course, I love good food just to eat good food. I love enjoying good taste, and especially fresh local produce, especially if you know the chef or the farmers. But putting it all together with friends and family or new folks, building community around a meal is something that has always been really like a key part of my life, always growing up, and continues to be still. One of the things I miss the most is hosting people here at my house for for dinner, impromptu dinners, or like big parties. I have a big Hanukkah party every year where the entire time I'm just frying latkes the entire time. The whole house smells like fried potato, and it's kind of smoky, and it's always too crowded because I always invite just more people than our house comfortably fits, and it's lovely, and it makes me so happy to have a house full of people that I'm feeding, and I miss that so much. Food's a big part of my family too. My brother's a chef. My mom cooked every meal growing up. It's like part of my everyday.
Are you gonna have that big party maybe next year, this upcoming Hanukkah?
I hope so. I hope so. Fingers crossed. I thought about trying to do it in the backyard this year or in 2021, and it just was too challenging. But hopefully 2022 it's gonna happen. Y'all can
Hopefully
come out.
we get an invite.
Yes.
That sounds like a blast. So another fun thing we always like to start with is, what was your first money memory that you remember? We'll start with Liv.
My gosh, my first money memory has to be the first time I ever got a paycheck. I was working at the local, it was Kaz Pizza in Cazenovia, New York. Shout out. And yeah, it was just that week after a lot of hard work around the pizza ovens and being dirty and sweaty, and getting my first paycheck and thinking like just the feeling of, wow, I really earned this. And I just felt really good.
Did you save that money or did you go buy something with it?
I definitely probably spent it on on like going to the movies or something. But I think like I worked a ton of jobs when I was a teenager, and it became like a fun thing trying to save as much money as I could. I think at any given time I was working like 3 or 4 jobs. And yeah, it was something I was so proud of, and maybe started my entrepreneurial journey. I would always find ways to clean people's garage out for X amount of money or whatever it was. So yeah, definitely good memories of that part of my life.
So you were straight up like just hustling back then, and cleaning garages,
Yep.
whatever it takes.
My mom would send emails to like the community church groups or the community like whatever, and just be like, anything you have, Olivia can do, so let us know. And whether it was like, I'd be like house sitting a dog and then run over to go clean someone's garage, and then run over to go like clean their boat, and then go run to my job at the pizza place. Like it was all I did over the summers, but definitely hustling.
And Sonya, we'll take a slight variation on it, which was I don't think we asked you this last time we talked about the first money memory, but do you remember like a first big purchase that you made that you were proud of, and was it a plant?
It wasn't a plan. Yeah, I do remember my first what felt like a big purchase to me was some Coach boots, and this is back when Coach was like the cool thing for like young professional women, like having a Coach purse or a Coach anything, and I didn't have any of that, but I did have my eye on these pair of boots. My boss had given me like a gift certificate to the Coach store, which was very close to our office, and for like Christmas, and I also got a Christmas bonus that year, and those things together, and they were on sale on a deep discount. I was able to buy the boots, and I still have them. But I'm disappointed I don't get to answer the other question, because my answer is much less wholesome than Liv's. My first
I
money.
think you should answer it anyway then.
All right, good.
Now I want to hear it.
Oh, my first money memory is actually trying to swindle my brother out of his allowance. So, or you could say like collecting investors, really. I so my family celebrated both Hanukkah and Christmas, and so we were, we'd go get a Christmas tree, and at the Christmas tree lots, they had those small Christmas trees that are alive. They're in the little plant. So okay, maybe I do have a plant money memory.
It was a plant.
Anyway.
I knew it was a plant.
So I really wanted one of those live Christmas trees, and they were really expensive. I don't know, 8 maybe, and I think it cost $14, which was a lot of money, way more than I got in an allowance. And so I was saving up my allowance, my coins, my 50 cents a week or whatever it was, in a little Tupperware jar, and I got my brother to invest alongside me. Really, it was really an investing fund, and right almost at the maybe the week before I had enough money to buy it, he decided he wanted out of this investment, and I was so mad. He took all his money back, and I had
so
to
unethical.
I know. And so I had to figure out how to come up with the rest of the money to buy my Christmas tree on my own, and I did. I don't remember how I got it, but I did, and I had these little panda ornaments, styrofoam ornaments, and we ended up planting the tree in the backyard, and it grew. It was a huge pine tree in my parents' backyard for a long time.
That's cool.
Yes.
I just feel that it's important to point out that even though, right, you said that your first purchase was boots, it was in fact a plant that you remember. So.
Yeah, maybe that was it was a big purchase. It's not what comes to mind when you ask that question, but it did feel like a big purchase. I usually bought candy with my allowance, and I didn't buy any candy for many weeks to save up for the Christmas tree.
Yeah, and I think if people don't know you and they're not watching this, right, they don't know that you live in a rainforest inside of your house. And,
it's true.
It's Sarah Kane, though, and you. She's also accumulating plants constantly.
Yes.
And Liv, it looks like you have a plant. Is that a real one, or do you just?
I'm very proud of my one plant. It is still alive. I think I've had it for over a year. It's a big accomplishment. I may or may not have one right outside of the frame that is almost completely dead. So I try. I think I ask Sonya a lot of plant questions every time we meet, but yeah, I'm trying. It's not the giant tree that Sonya has behind her.
I'm not the best with plants either. Liv, don't feel bad. I keep killing snake plants, and I'm told they're unkillable, but I manage to kill them. So.
Stop watering.
Sorry. May they all
Don't water it so often.
The biggest lie is that succulents are easy to take care of, because I have never been able to keep a succulent alive.
Me neither. We're kindred. I knew it.
Well, speaking of growing things, right, let's talk a little bit, about the growth of Choir. And you told a little bit of the story, but I'd love to kind of hear maybe more of the background on why this area is important to you, right? So of financial services and representation at conferences and speaking and speakers, where was your first interactions in this space, right? First conference, first interactions, and probably some of these are not all positive, but I'd love to just hear, how did you become involved with this, and how did it become meaningful to you? And actually, anyone can answer this one. So, Anna,
okay, well,
I've been hogging the microphone, too. So if you want to answer some of it, too, step right in.
Well, I think Liv and I both have answers for, the first times that we got involved in this area. And Liv spent her whole career working in PR and the media. And I've been a conference speaker for the past about 5 years, and before that, of course, was at conferences for my prior job. I worked as a CEO of a broker-dealer, and before that, many other jobs at a broker-dealer, and so went to a variety of conferences, many of which were not great experiences, and some were. I'm very much an extrovert. I love the networking and meeting people and learning new ideas. And one of the things that I noticed quickly was that often we're hearing the same ideas from the same people over and over at conferences, and also that the stages looked very, very homogenous. And I can hand it over to Liv about what she sees in the media, and then I'd love to just talk about why conferences and why media. Why is this piece the thing that we want to change?
Yeah. So before I entered into working solely in financial services, I was working at a generalist PR agency down in Nashville. And when I moved up to New York City, I remember literally telling a recruiter, like, I'll take any PR job, just not finance. Like, it was the one industry that I wasn't interested in, because I never could relate to my clients or the people that we were putting into the media. Felt like I was telling the same types of stories over and over, so it wasn't interesting to me. And of course, when you move to New York City without a job, you're a fool for not taking the first one that comes your way. So the first job I got was at a financial services PR firm, and I was like, all right, let's do this. And being so entrenched in financial services, that feeling continued with me. I felt like the only time the media would specifically ask for a woman or a person of color to speak on a topic, it was about being a woman or a person of color, not about their expertise. Or it was for an all women's event or something like that. And so when, as I grew in the industry, and saw kind of what happens, when media reach out specifically and ask for a source, it's typically, the same people over and over that are being sent to speak to the journalist, and those stories end up sounding really repetitive. And so when I started my own company, I was like, I want to tell stories and work with companies that aren't, that are different. And to find those, I want to work with more businesses led by women and people of color. And through that progression, that's really when I thought, man, it would be so cool if, as a journalist, I could think of a topic and the only sources that came to me were folks who I had not spoken to before, folks who were underrepresented and had different stories to tell. And that's really what led to the initial idea for Choir, was originally connecting the media. And then, as Sonya said, that the problem really transcends into the conference space too. We found that conferences are the most visible part really of any company and marketing strategy. And we were like, we need to start there.
And I'll add the piece that Liv is talking about, the connecting journalists and conference organizers with financial services experts who are women, people of color, non-binary folks. That's coming soon. That's our Voices platform. That's what started the idea for Choir, and is the next piece of it that we're launching. But I just want to kind of touch on listening and why conferences and why media. There's so many areas of finance that need this kind of attention and help, right? And I support all of the different programs that are aiming to bring a wider variety of perspectives into our companies as well. And the reason that we're really focused on conferences and media, in addition to our, it being our areas of expertise, is because both of us really think that who we listen to matters. And that hearing from women and people of color, and especially women of color, benefits all of us. by driving innovation, broadening our perspectives, and expanding our industry's ability to reach way more people. And shifting who we listen to, like the whole industry listens to, is a step in the direction of more equal distribution of power. Because seeing women and people of color on stage expands. Oops, hang on a sec, y'all. Sorry, my alarm's going off. Shifting who we listen to is a step in redistributing power to be more equitable, because when we see women and people of color on a stage, it expands who we view as an authority and who gets to set direction for a company or who gets to set direction for an industry. And so that's why we're so enthusiastic about changing who we listen to. It's for everybody.
Yeah, and
One of the cool things I think that you guys are doing is kind of sourcing information from women and people of color themselves. So you've interviewed a lot of folks who are women of color, people of color, non-binary folks. So tell us a little bit about that process and how that's kind of informed what you're doing and how choir works.
Yeah, if you're just listening and you're not seeing this, I'll say that, Liv and I are both white women, and so it was very important to us to make sure that we're listening to lots of different voices, especially women of color and also men of color, and as we built. And so we spent a lot of time doing that. We know that as white women, we've likely been beneficiaries of the diversity programs that finance has had in the past, and we want to use our positions to open the door up for all the different groups that finance has historically ignored. And so we did, as we built, it took about a year to build choir, and as we did, we talked to or interviewed or surveyed, we think probably over 100 people, a wide variety of people, conference organizers, financial executives, just across the spectrum of all the places that our work might touch, and trying really at every point to center the voices of the people most impacted by exclusion, and also we're centering those same voices that we're hoping to amplify.
How many conference organizers / financial professionals told you how much they dislike conferences?
Mostly you, Jamie.
There was not a broad response in the 100+ people. It was.
Actually, we did hear from a number of not conference organizers, but financial professionals who no longer attend conferences because they didn't feel safe at conferences, or they didn't feel like their perspectives were represented. So we did hear that sentiment from a number of folks.
Yeah, we heard that, from a lot of folks, the sentiment around hearing the same stories over and over. I want to attend conferences, especially now that, we're hopefully at the end of a really disruptive pandemic. People's budgets for travel are smaller. They're thinking more comprehensively about the types of events they want to attend, what it's worth to leave their family, or, and so as they're really considering events, they're putting a lot more things into perspective now than maybe they were even a few years ago.
And can I ask, I guess everybody here, somebody asked me this recently, and I have my answer, but I'd like to hear from everyone else's. Like, what is the purpose of, if you think we'll stick to conferences, but what's the purpose of a conference in your life, right? Like what meaning or purpose would it have for you? because all three of you have been to probably some conferences that you didn't get any value out of, which I think happens to people. And then all of a sudden, as you said, Sonya, people are like, well, I'm not going anymore. And I hope that there are good conferences and experiences and communities for everybody. But I even was doing a little bit about communities, and that, there's kind of this notion that, communities are supposed to be positive, but there's actually really negative aspects of community too, even though the term in general is typically used as positive, but it can actually be very restrictive and detrimental to somebody's health. But that's a little off track now, but I'll go back to the original question. So, Anna, I don't know, do you want to start?
Sure. When I attend conferences, not for work purposes, for my own purposes, I want to go to learn and to connect with my community, right? Would that be like, I used to be active in the National Association of Hispanic Journalists, and my sorority conference, I'd go to connect with sisters all over the country that I didn't know and make lifelong friendships. Like, that's always the goal, is like to make lifelong friendships that could, nurture me as a person and possibly sometime maybe even professionally, but definitely a personal connections is my favorite thing.
Is there anything a conference has done really well before that fostered the personal connections? Because when I hear that, I would say very little of what I think a conference organizer spends their time on is, how do I help foster personal connections, right? Yeah.
That's a good point, because I don't think a lot of conferences for working professionals do that very well. The conferences that I find did that very well were, organizations geared towards students. Like, going back to my sorority conference, right, they room you with people you don't know from across the country, so that way you're forced to kind of make those connections. And some of those girls that I was connected with forcefully ended up being some of my greatest friends that I still talk to and that I'm still connected with. And we can't do that with professionals, right? We can't.
Yeah, I'm not rooming with anyone.
Yeah.
So
but those types of things, I don't know, a lot of times, I'm very highly introverted, and I think that conferences are not geared for people like me. I don't feel comfortable going up to somebody and just starting to talk. I do it because I have to, but I don't want to do that. So, there are some ideas that I've shot around in terms of putting together a document for Excel, things we could do possibly. And the idea of having some sort of event where it's kind of structured like a speed dating event where you just talk to people, right? Where the onus is not on the person who is introverted and uncomfortable to go up to somebody and start talking and tell, so just different, that's one idea, just different ways to do that. But currently I don't think conferences do a good job of that.
Yeah, I have not seen a lot of that either. I've been to a lot of conferences. A couple things I have seen that are maybe a small version are, I've seen conferences that have a very strong community feel, that have a regular year-over-year attendees that go every year, do something where they'll match those attendees with new attendees to help them sort of navigate what parts of the conference would be best suited for them to pay attention to, or who they should meet. And so that sort of one-on-one matching can be helpful, but that's not exactly community building. It's more like relationship building. And then I've seen some community building or maybe intended community building where there's smaller groups meeting inside of a bigger conference. Typically this looks like a gender thing. There's the women's reception, and have sort of mixed feelings on those. It's really nice to be in a room with just or mostly women, especially at a financial event. And if it's at the same time as a regular reception, it's kind of difficult to choose between. Do I want to be at the one that everybody is at, or the one that's just this invitation only women thing? That feels like a choice that underrepresented folks shouldn't have to make, and I see that position on conferences often. But those smaller groups do help in building connections among people.
Yeah, in recent years I've actually seen a couple conferences that have had tech platforms help with that awkward meetup thing, kind of like what you were saying, Anna, with speed dating. Where you schedule 15-minute blocks to meet someone, and I've found that to be really helpful. Like you can book your entire 3-day conference here and there with little 15-minute meetings. And for someone who is also more naturally introverted, I think it's helpful, and it takes that awkwardness away, which is nice.
Well, I guess pushing on that question again a little bit more, which is, Anna, I think you did a great job, and then the community building. I think it's interesting that it's not a big piece of what a lot of at least the ones I've been around. What are your answers, Liv and Sonya, when you're thinking about conferences and what they've meant to you? Is it the same? Is it learning in community, or is it different?
For me, it's pretty similar. It's meeting people in person. Like I met both of you, Anna and Jamie, for the first time in person at conferences. I had worked with or knew you sort of from afar before, and it's always really nice to make those connections in person. There's something you cannot replace that personal connection. So that is really nice, and meeting new folks too. And for me, I like the sessions. I like going. I know people talk about they just go there for the networking, and I'm a super extrovert. I could network all day long, but I actually like going to the sessions, things that I haven't heard of before or haven't thought about before. Being able to drop in for a couple of days of just intense learning, where that I just can't seem to force myself to do at my desk. I learn much better listening to an animated speaker and just being able to take all that in all at once instead of trying to read online or something like that. And being able to discuss what you heard from the speaker with other people afterwards really kind of cements that learning for me. And so I love conferences. I'm like the opposite end of the spectrum as you are, Jamie.
I've also been to a lot of conferences, so I think I might have had my life's fill of conferences already. Like it's a possible thing, right? Like everything in life, I feel like there's a certain amount of it that you were supposed to consume one way or another, and I might have passed my conference consumption amount already. And, so that might be it for me. Well, so tell me a little bit. Obviously, we run events with big event company to a large extent, small events more so, but we do run a couple larger events. And so I know that we've engaged with you to work with kind of choir on the event. And walk us through a little bit, like the kind of certification part. How did you come up with that? What is it that you're looking for in conferences? And then I guess the following step is like, what's the improvement levels that you want to see out there? Because I would assume that's really the ultimate goal, is to see improvement in things, not, just putting stamps on stuff that, hey, look, here's the certification and you're done. It's a drive to see constant improvement and development in an industry.
Yeah, I can.
Yes. Liv, you want to take the big picture answer there, and then if you want to get into details of how the scoring works, I can do that if you're interested.
Yeah, and apologies, my internet's lagging a little bit or something, so please let me know if I cut out. I think it's important to talk about why we chose to start with the certification. One of the things that we found in all of our interviews and just really focusing on this topic for an entire year is that our industry has never actually had a common definition or a benchmark for what it means to be representative. We've never defined what it means to be diverse, and so we found that well-intentioned conferences and organizations were aiming to do well and put more representation on stage, but had this moving target essentially. And it was difficult to measure, what they were doing and the progress and how it fit in with their higher level DEI initiatives from an organizational level. And so we developed the certification to really look at, if we're looking speaker by speaker, how representative are women, non-binary folks, and people of color compared to the representation in the U.S. population. And I'll let Sonya go more into depth about how exactly we measure that. But the way we work with conferences is we essentially we certify their previous year's conference. So we put that through our algorithm that determines the overall visibility of women, non-binary people, and people of color. And we use that to generate our choir score, which is a 0 to 100 score. And conferences that score a 60 or above are eligible to get certified. There's a few other criteria in there starting July 1st of this year. They must have an active anti-harassment policy. They must have diversity on all panels. And if they have 3 or more keynotes, at least one of those keynotes has to be a woman or a person of color. And lastly, women of color must be represented throughout the agenda, not only talking about DEI related topics. So the certification, really serves to be that measurable benchmark for conferences so that they can improve year over year and they can see exactly where their areas of opportunity are, where they're doing really well, and where maybe they need to really focus on expanding their networks.
And I'll jump in there and say that, the 60 mark, the 60 and above where conferences get certified is not necessarily easy to get. We're seeing that conferences that have been planning with diversity in mind and some representation in mind usually meet the 60 and above mark, but it's not necessarily an easy one to get. And we want to work with conferences that want to do better and don't know how. We're not looking just to work with the conferences that can get the gold seal, right? We want to work with those even that might not reach the 60 or above level, that might not earn a bronze seal, but they know that this is an area where they want to improve. They see this as an opportunity to get real data, once we have this really rich data about the previous agenda, we can give very insightful feedback and recommendations on programming to improve year over year, like you were saying. And so we've found that there are conferences that want that. They know they're not doing as well as they would like to do, and they see this as an opportunity to get the data and the guidance to improve year over year.
And what does that guidance look like? Like, how are you advising them? Like, what are, I guess, what does that look like?
Yeah. Maybe let me give just briefly a background on how the scoring works, because I think that will kind of inform some of the guidance and some of our insights. It fully informs our guidance and insights. The scoring is all based on data. It's all objective. Like Liv said, we look at the most recent agenda for a conference, and for that, we look at every speaking spot on the agenda and score it each spot on 7 different visibility factors. I'm getting some feedback. Is anybody else getting that? No? Okay.
For a second, not anymore.
Okay, I'll carry on then. Okay, so we score on 7 different, each spot on 7 different visibility factors, and then we cross-reference that data with the race and gender the combined race and gender of each speaker. And then add an additional factor for women of color who have been discriminated against historically on both race and gender. And so we have sort of a multiplying effect for how well they are represented or not represented that's included in the algorithm. And so we take all that, and that's what creates the score. And once we have the score, it represents how visible women of color, men of color, white women, and non-binary folks are on the agenda in comparison to their representation in the U.S. population. So that's what the score itself means. And once we get into all that sort of nitty-gritty detail, we can see really interesting data points. For example, one that we see often is that while women of color are often underrepresented as speakers, just to put some numbers here, women of color make up 20% of the U.S. population. And say they make up only 5% of the speakers, often they'll make up only, say, 2% of the visibility. So while they're underrepresented as speakers, which we would sort of expect given what financial services looks like, they're also put in lower than average visibility roles, which is not as good for their careers, and it's also not as good for the conference's choir score. And the fastest way to improve score is to put women of color in high visibility roles. And so we can give insight like that. Another common thing we find is that Black folks are underrepresented on agendas, and often when they are on agendas, they're in the DEI panels, even when they're experts in some other very specific area of finance. And so we really want to see people, I think DEI is a great topic and it should be on the agenda, and also it's not where we want to see people of color on speaking about their subject matter expertise in addition to DEI panels. And what we don't want is to see everybody kind of pigeonholed into that one panel that's happening probably at the same time as 4 other panels. So we can see that level of detail and trends and patterns, and we look at though we score on, say, these buckets, women of color, white women, men of color, etc., we are looking at more specific race and ethnicity data than that, and so we can give that data to conferences too and tell them, hey, you had 0 Latina speakers on your agenda, and this is an area I suggest you have a look at. So those are the kind of details, and then we give as feedback, and then we offer training and tools and resources for the conference team to take that data and use it to improve representation in their next agenda, and hopefully year-over-year improvement as well. Liv, did I miss anything?
No, you got it. I would just add, one question that we've gotten a lot of, which is interesting, is, why are you all using the U.S. population as a benchmark instead of the representation that we see in our industry? If we're planning conferences in our industry, if we have a proportional amount of speakers to the representation, isn't that good enough? And, we feel really strongly that if we are in any way going to move this industry forward, and all of the amazing benefits to having representative voices that Sonya mentioned in the beginning, if we're going to reap those benefits, we have to be looking outside of our industry. And really, the goal for us is to help conferences put on events that look like the world we walk around in the U.S.
Quickly, how does paying speakers, people of color, women of color, how does that factor into a choir score? Because I know a lot of conferences, they'll ask a woman of color or a person of color to speak and then not offer to pay them, and then that's just a whole issue in itself. Does that factor into the choir scores at all?
It doesn't factor into the score. The score is just looking at who's on the who's on the agenda, but it does come up in the consulting that we do with conferences. It's something very much top of mind, and it's something that we'll look to also sort of address in some ways with the Voices platform that we bring out in later this year. And I know that some people are willing to speak, in exchange for going to the conference or whatever, and I don't want to limit decide for other people what opportunities are right for them. And I know that pay equity is a big issue. So it's something that we do address with conferences and is top of mind. Thank you for bringing it up.
Yeah, and I know, Sonya, we've talked about that topic before. And my views, I mean, hopefully, like most views, continue to evolve. And the pay one is tough, not in like that I believe that women of color or certain people are being paid less than others. I believe that's occurring. But as you kind of brought up, like what an individual is willing to take for a conference is vastly different. And I think I told you this story once before. When I first started speaking, I asked a bunch of people what they were charging to speak, and I cut it in half. And I actually had one of those speakers come up to me one time and say, Jamie, I heard that you're doing all these talks for like $2,000. And they're like, that's way too cheap. There's a couple of us that are on the same like circuit. We'd love for you to start charging like the $4,000 plus travel that everyone else is charging at that time for these type of events. And I just remember being like, well, no, because then they'd only hire you, but they will hire me for $2,000, and so I'll just keep taking all of your speaking spots for half of what you are doing. And I was totally fine with doing that at that point, right? And so it's kind of an interesting thing because, like, even back then, I would do ones for free because I didn't have a name, and if somebody said, hey, like, will you come to the conference? Like, absolutely. Most of my speaking now is free because I've kind of, but that's a different part of my life now, right? There was a time period where more than half my income was coming from my speaking, and then my fees did go up, and I had to be more cognizant of that. But now my life has changed again, and now, I'm in a role where I have a good base salary where I don't have to worry about speaking agreements, and I am willing to go speak, right? I don't know what I did, and I think 2019, I think I did over 100 speaking engagements, and I didn't get paid for any of them. And that puts a lot of challenges on conferences, right? Because you can get a speaker for free, and, it puts pressure on who do you then want to pay and who do you want to bring in, because if somebody's in a role where or sponsors creates an additional problem with the speakers, right? Where sponsors will pay to put their speaker on. And then as a conference, when you're trying to make money, somebody's willing to pay you. Like all those just become kind of like tough factors. I will say one thing that's changed for me is I think that what we call industry conferences, in big air quotes, I think I'm kind of to the point, if it's not a sponsored session where the sponsor is kind of buying the spot, which I think will always be something that occurs, I kind of think we need to get to almost like a standard where there's like a minimum, like every speaker should be paid something as a bottom line, if you're calling it an industry conference. Now, like company-specific conference, they want to host it for their own people. I don't feel the same about it, right?
Yeah.
But if you kind of want to say, hey, we're here for the industry, it's almost like then you need to act on behalf of benefiting the industry. And I think that there should be a difference between those.
Yeah, or at least pay people who are in those spots. If you're paying some of them, pay all of them and pay them the same. Some of what we've heard is even people on the same panel are getting paid differently, which and usually in an inequitable way that you would probably guess based on race and gender, partly because some folks are either have more experience asking for money or more comfortable just asking for money. I know that speaking fees vary really widely, but I would hope that a conference, if they are paying one person on the panel, they should be paying other people on the panel the same amount, and definitely not discriminating on race and gender there. That would be not good to hear about. And yeah, I similarly have, there's a lot of pieces that go into putting together a conference, and the sponsor issue is is a big one, and some people are willing to speak for free because they benefit from it in some way. Do think conferences, though, need to be mindful of ways that pay can be equitable.
Anna, I think we're probably up
Yes.
to our time, so.
So we always love to end on a hopeful note and ask, what's the impact you hope to leave on the profession and the world? Whoever wants to start.
I'll start. I think specifically, we would love for choir to completely disrupt the financial services industry, put, more brilliant voices of women and people of color on stage. And once that works, and once the financial industry looks like the world around us, we hope to be able to replicate that and do the same for so many other industries that have very similar problems. And I think if we can do that, I'll be very happy.
Yep, the goal for us is that we are successful enough in changing the face of both conferences and who's quoted in the media, so much to that representation on stage and in the media is normal, and we can work ourselves out of business.
That's awesome. And, I'm going to be relying on all three of you to help continue to improve Excel in our events, too. So Anna usually has really good ideas. So, but thanks, everyone, for, everything that you're doing out there in the industry. And then, personally, for me, too. I mean, I've had great interactions with all of you and just helping me learn. And as I said, constantly evolving my notions of things and hopefully, challenging others to do the same. But so thanks. Where's the best place to follow you guys? Website, those types of, I don't remember last time, Sonya, we got here and you didn't plug the newsletter, and we had to end the recording and start another one to re-plug the newsletter. So we've got it ahead of time this time.
All right, we're ready. You can find all three pieces of what choir does at hellochoir.com. Hello Choir is also our handle on Twitter and Instagram, and you can find us on LinkedIn by searching for us. And you can find Liv and I by searching our names on LinkedIn and Twitter. And you can sign up for our newsletter by texting the word choir to 55444.
And I would plug one more thing. If you are listening to this and you know of a woman, a non-binary person, a man of color, a woman of color, please send them to hellochoir.com/voices. We want to collect the information from those folks who might be interested down the line in media and conference opportunities.
Well, that's fantastic. Liv, Sonya, Anna, thanks again for everything here today. And thank you, everyone else, for listening to this week's episode of the Framework Podcast.